together with. We are looking forward to all your participation and questions in the Q&A session later. Before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you about what ISIS is and stands for. The International Solar Energy Society is a non-profit, UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to achieve the renewable energy transformation. By becoming a member of ISIS, you are supporting the 100% renewable energy movement. The presentations and recording of this webinar will be available for 24 hours on the ISIS website. After that time, we will post them to the ISIS members area. If you are a member, log in and click on Members Area in the top level menu, and you will already see the library of past webinars. If you are not a member, we definitely encourage you to sign up under join.isis.org. You are welcome and encouraged to ask questions, and I certainly hope you do, at any time throughout the webinar. To ask a question, select the questions pane on your screen and simply type in your question. Please specify who your question is directed to, so which panelist speaker. Questions will be addressed after all the presentations in a 20-minute or so Q&A session. We would also like to encourage you to use the ISIS discussion forum on LinkedIn to continue the Q&A and the discussion even after the webinar has ended. So a special thank you to the Smart Reflex project for supporting this webinar. Riccardo Battisti will tell you more about the Smart Reflex project shortly. In the meantime, please take a look at the slides provided as a handout in your webinar control panel, but Riccardo will explain that in a minute. Through sponsorships, donations, and also the support of ISIS members, we can continue hosting these free webinars. So for more information about becoming a member or sponsor, please visit our website www.ises.org or join.isis.org. Or you could get in touch with us via email. That's public.relations@isis.org. Our moderator for this webinar is Riccardo Battisti, the coordinator of the Intelligent Energy Europe Smart Reflex project. Riccardo has been the main driving force in organizing this webinar. Thank you so much for this, and we look forward to your introduction. Riccardo, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and thanks, of course, for organizing jointly this webinar. This is the second webinar we organized together, and I would like to give a very short introduction to the Smart Reflex project so that you know the context. So we have this Intelligent Energy Europe project about renewable district heating involving 6 regions in 4 different European countries, as you see here in this simplified map. Our goal was to develop, let's say, tools for going towards 100% renewable district heating and cooling. And we developed this through different activities. First of all, we set up a regional task force with all key stakeholders for each one of the regions involved in the project. And we also organized capacity building workshops in each country for all these stakeholders. And I would like to give you just a snapshot, some examples, let's say, of which tools, which documents we develop, which could support also you in going towards this renewable district heating and cooling. So we develop a guide for regional authorities, which, by the way, is one of the handouts, one of the documents that Joanna was talking about. So you have it in your control panel in the webinar control panel, and you can download it directly from here, but of course you can also find it on the Smart Reflex website. Then we develop a document on recommendations on how to set up a task force on this topic of renewable district heating and cooling. We also develop these regional strategies for each one of the 6 regions participating in the project. We also made available the training material we used for the capacity building workshops in all the countries, in all the regions, and we also developed some practical case studies, feasibility studies on real plants at local level, but also on policies on renewable district heating and cooling, which will be the main topic of this webinar. So you find all this material and also other information like presentation articles and so on about the topic of renewable district heating and cooling. So I encourage you to visit the website and also give us feedback if you need more information. So as I was saying, there are 2 main end-house in your control panel, which by the way you find it here. So if you have it in English, this is how you see. This is a screenshot of your part of your control panel. So you see these handouts. So you have this Smart Reflex guide for regional authorities, and then you also have a questionnaire. You can download this questionnaire, and I ask you also to please fill it in and send it back to me. This is my email address. We need this questionnaire just to receive a feedback on how also this webinar and our activities have been helpful to you. I promise that it's a very short questionnaire, so it's really 4 questions, and you need really maybe less than 1 minute to fill it in. So please do it as soon as possible. So this is the agenda for today. We will have a first presentation reporting an experience about energy planning and how district heating is included in this energy planning in Central Denmark region. And then we will go with the two following presentations on a little bit more detail, because we see some examples in Italy and then in the UK, in London, of how the local heat planning, let's say, could be really brought at a practical level, and how this involves district heating. And then, as Joanna already pointed out, there will be a Q&A session. So I think I can now introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is Louise Langbach Hansen. She's working as a development officer in the Central Denmark region with the main focus areas of renewable energy, of course, strategic energy planning, and also district heating. A very interesting point is that she is facilitating the collaboration with the municipalities and the different energy actors, including heat supply companies within the region, for developing, for instance, a common energy strategies, analysis and knowledge sharing used for local energy. So we would really like to hear about her practical experiences about how to carry out such a strategy. So Louise, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to give a speech at this webinar. Denmark is divided into 5 regions, and I'm from the Central Denmark region. We have a population of 1.3 million inhabitants and consist of 19 municipalities. The region was formed back in 2007, and our politicians, they set up some goals for renewable energy in the region. And as you can see, the goal is 50% renewable energy in the year 2025. And it is the total energy system, including electricity, heat, transportation, and industry. And the long-term goal is 100% in 2050. Today we have a share of 33% renewables in the region, and you can see this is above the Danish average of 27 and also about the EU average of 15. It is quite good, and as you can see, we monitor every second year the amount of energy, of the renewable energy. Actually, we monitor this together with the 19 municipalities, and here you can see the 19 municipalities and their amount of renewables in 2013. Actually, right now we are updating these energy accounts with 2015 data. But as you can see here, the 19 municipalities within our region, they vary a lot in their share of renewables. And this is, of course, due to different political ambitions within the municipalities, and also due to different opportunities to raise the share of renewables. And I'll give you some examples of how we work as a region in this area. But first I will tell you very shortly about the energy authorities in Denmark, so you understand the role we have as a region. Because the state of Denmark make the legislation, the laws, and the energy taxation. And we have the 5 regions, and actually we do have no formal authority concerning energy matters. Then we have 98 municipalities, and they have the responsibility for heat planning and regulatory approval to local utilities. So what can we then do, and how can we work as a region in the energy area when we have no formal authority? Well, what we do in Central Denmark region is that we facilitate cooperation in the region between the municipalities, energy companies, etc. We monitor the progress, as I showed you before, and this is very useful both for the region and for the municipalities, because we of course can see the progress, but we also use the monitoring to plan new actions. Then we initiate development projects. I will show you a few of them in a little minute. And we also initiate general business support initiatives within the region. This is one example of what we do. This is a project on strategic energy planning together with all the 19 municipalities, the region, 2 universities, 13 energy supply companies, and 5 energy actors. It was a project we finished last year. It was financed by the Danish Energy Agency and the Central Denmark region. The goal here, or the topic for the project, was to build up knowledge and to build up overview and to formulate strategic energy plans and actions within the region. As you can see here, we divided the region and the municipalities in 3 working groups, and they work with different topics throughout the project. We had 7 focus areas, not only the district heating, it was also one important focus area, but as you can see here, we also investigated onshore wind power, biogas, biomass, energy efficient houses, industries, farming, and green transportation. The project, in the project we started with making different analysis, and this is one of the analysis regarding district heating. We screened the border between district heating and individual heating supply all over the region. And we actually, it was one of the universities who made this analysis and this work. Here you can see an example. This shows a map for one municipality, it is Randers, and all of the 19 municipalities have had maps like this. It shows the border between district heating and individual heating, and it is screened on basis on consumer economy. So as you can see, the blue spots are the existing district heating areas, and the very dark blue is expensive district heating. But for instance, the green areas is where the district heating, if we expand the existing district heating areas to new areas nearby, then in the green areas, the district heating will be cheaper than individual biomass boilers or heat pumps. So it should be very interesting to investigate district heating in the green areas. The yellow areas is where district heating is cheaper than individual oil, and the red spots are no-go for district heating. Maps like this are good to have for the municipalities in their dialogue between the municipalities and the heating supply companies. Another example of an analysis is this one, where we screened the potential for using industrial surplus heat in the district heating. And this shows the As you can see here, we have the total district heating demand in Aarhus. It's the largest municipality in the region. And the green one is what is possible to supply by industrial surplus heat. It's not that much in Aarhus, but you can see it's a lot more in others of the municipalities. In total, 17% of the district heating demand in the region today can be covered by industrial surplus heat and heat pumps. We made different analyses, and finally we formulated together the 14 partners in this project, 14 partners. We formulated a common strategy for district heating and also for onshore wind power and the other focus areas. But here I only show you the one for district heating. Together we formulated that the goal for district heating is to achieve 100% renewable resources within the district heating and gradually reduce the biomass consumption in favor of fuel-free district heating solutions as surplus heat from industry, solar heating, heat pumps, and geothermal heating. And the reason for this is that the biomass resource is, in the future we will need it for other purposes than district heating, for instance biofuels and biomaterials. And also you can see in the strategy we would like to expand the district heating from 60% today and up to 70% of the total heat demand within the region. As you can see, we have a lot of district heating already, but based on the analysis or the screening on consumer economy, it could be good to raise it further up to 70. The whole strategic energy project was called Spatial, and the conclusion you can see here, because if we take action as we have formulated in the strategy concerning district heating, wind power, etc., we will by the year 2035 reach an amount of or share of renewables of 70%. And if we include wind power produced within our region but exported outside, we'll raise a share of 90%. This is quite good, and it is based on known technologies and mainly local resources. So I think it's quite interesting. Another example, and as I mentioned, this is one example of how we can manage to work as a region with no formal authority or role. We can facilitate, we can put people together, organizations together, municipalities, energy supply companies, and then we can facilitate this common energy strategy work. Another example is here is a new analysis we have made in the area of Viborg, because Apple is right now building a new large data center, and they have a lot of surplus heat from this data center. And if this heat should only be used in the city of Viborg, which is the closest city or nearby, they will perhaps be able to use 25% of the potential for surplus heat. And we would like to use as much as possible, so therefore the region has co-financed a transmission line analysis where we have looked and investigated if some of the surplus heat could cross the municipal border and go to either Randers, Aarhus or Herning, where they have large district heating areas or systems. So it's another example of how we as a region can, if it's only the municipality of Viborg who works with this, they do not right now have interest in using surplus heat in other municipalities, and that is why we as a region co-finance and take our part here. And our latest effort, our latest developed project, you can see here, the region together with 24 district heating companies, we have made an application for financial support from the EU. These 24 district heating companies are all fired by natural gas, and they are planning to invest in more renewable technologies within the next 3 years. And to do so, they need technical assistance, calculations, etc. And together we have made this application for financial support to the technical assistance. And we hope and expect that we can start this February or March, so we can help them increase their share of renewables, and this will also increase the total share of renewable energy within the region. This was what I wanted to explain to you about how you can work as, or how we do work as a region with no formal role, but still we're succeeding with this way of facilitating and collaborating with important energy partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Louise. I think this was a really interesting example of, yeah, as you said, also a regional authority with no formal, let's say, commitment can really help in developing these strategies. I just remind all participants that you can start typing your questions about this presentation, and we will collect all questions, and then we will try to answer as many questions as possible at the end of all presentation in the Q&A session. So we move to the next speaker now. Next speaker is Alice Denarier. Alice is working, and she's also a PhD student at the Energy Department of Politecnico di Milano in Italy, and she's especially working in projects on renewable energy and in particular solar thermal, and also of course in district heating and in the integration, let's say, of renewables in district heating grids, and she's also part of the Smart Reflex project. So she will bring us to let's say, to some practical examples of how the mapping of heat demand and supply can really help the local heat planning in some Italian examples. So Alice, the floor is yours.
Okay, so thank you, Riccardo. Yes, as Riccardo mentioned, I'm working in the IRU, that is the Italian District Heating Association. So, and as the energy department of the university is part of the association, we are working on the Smart Reflex project, and I'm going to present today the results in particular of this project and the synergy between with another European project about renewable energies and mapping that was RES-HC spread, both implemented in the same region, that is Emilia-Romagna. So since we are speaking about renewable energy sources in heating and cooling sector, let me just very briefly introduce you the framework of our work. So the Italian situation about energy sector. So as in Europe, but in particular in Italy, we can definitely say that heating and cooling sector use of renewable energy sources is really underexploited. Almost 40% of the consumption, final energy consumption, is due to the civil sector, and of this fraction 70% is due to heating and cooling. And just 20% is given by renewable. So we're trying to work on this, let's say, on this piece of cake to reduce the fossil fuel consumption and to increase the renewable energy use. So the framework, this framework together with the European directives, of course, have highlighted the importance of local condition analysis to increase the use of renewable energy sources, because it's only at looking at very local scale that renewable sources or surplus heat sources can be found, and in particular some synergies between local demand and local availability of this kind of sources can show up. So district heating has demonstrated to be a very good technology to exploit this kind of synergies that would otherwise be wasted. So it's thanks to energy mapping and energy planning that this district heating project can start. And speaking about local condition analysis, of course, regions and municipalities play a crucial role in the growth of renewable energy sources, use and energy planning. So these two projects were particularly interesting in their synergy because they both supported regional and local authorities, let's say at two levels, while RES-HC spread was supporting the region, so in this case Emilia-Romagna, in the development of specific plan about renewable energies. Through the important tool of energy mapping, Smart Reflex used their results to support local authorities in the development, in some case, of energy plans, and in particularly in the analysis of district heating case studies that could use renewable energy sources. So I'm going to present you briefly the result of this project in which I was not involved, but in which we have used the results for our case study analysis. That is the mapping of energy, the energy mapping of the region. So the Agency for Environmental Protection and Energy, ARPA, developed these maps of demand and of existing energy sources and of potential renewable energy sources to be used. And thanks to the overlapping, let's say, of these two layers, it was very useful to find most suitable areas in which renewable energy sources plants could be built, and in particular district heating, of course. So what you are seeing now is the map of the demand in the residential sector. The color scale, of course, from green to red highlights the energy demand intensity, and it was made through the analysis of the fuel consumption per municipality, and that it was afterwards redistributed per the floor area of the residential sector. The same analysis has been done also for the tertiary sector, and in particular there was also the addition of the important anchor loads building, the so-called anchor loads building. So buildings, in particular public buildings with very large and steady heat demand that are really, let's say, interesting for consumer for district heating plants. For the last, let's say, map of the demand, that it's not only demand but it can be also a source map, let's say, for the industrial sector. The consumption mapping was possible thanks to the database of IPPC industrial activity. So basically all the industrial activities, companies and energy production plant has to ask for an authorization to the Environmental Protection Agency, and to monitor their pollutant emission and energy consumption every year. So these data, thanks to this data, all the companies and their consumption could be put in the map, and they represent as well an energy demand, but also potential energy source, because usually some, as we have seen also in Denmark, they are looking for this. Industrial activity has lost all waste heat that could be definitely recovered thanks to district heating. So as I mentioned, also a map of the existing plant was made, and the last effort they made was to map also potential new energy sources, in particular renewables, that could be used in the heating and cooling sector. So what you see here are just two examples of them, so biomass and geothermal. These data were already existing thanks to the analysis performed in the case of biomass by the regional forest plants, and this is a map of potential of use of biomass for power generation. And in the second map you see the potential of low enthalpy geothermal energy that is estimated, as you may see here, also color scale depends on the energy intensity. That is really interesting interesting in particular for Emilia-Romagna region, because you may see that it's quite an interesting potential, in particularly if linked with the high efficiency heat pumps, and I would say that it's quite unexploited now, but there's a big potential. So after having obtained all this map, overlapping them and looking at local scale, it definitely shows up some areas in which synergy between demand and possible new energy sources could be very interesting and exploited thanks to district heating. So we have used in our project, so in Smart Reflex project, this data to properly size and analyze some kind of pilot case studies. So some case studies of pilot plans that we hope that after our analysis will be really implemented. I would say that I'm sure about that. And what I'm going to show you now are two examples of the case studies that we have done. So looking at the mapping, you can see the mapping of the region at a local scale, so a sort of zoom of the project, of the result of the previous project we have done here in this small town that is Mirandola. And the case is about the extension of an existing district heating system in which the local authority, together with the utility running the existing system, is planning to extend the district heating and use renewable energy sources in order to reduce their dependency on fossil fuels and on their unpredictable price. This is quite a nice example of integrated urban planning and energy planning. In fact, after that ruinous earthquake affected the area in 2012, the city is undergoing a big renovation of the damaged areas, especially in its historical center. And so the district heating line is foreseen to be extended in this area and to be the only, let's say, way to serve heating and cooling sector in this area. So thanks to the mapping of the region, we could find, we could properly estimate the new energy demand of the district heating line and map also some kind of synergy on the territory. So in fact, as you may see, the configuration of plant that we have analyzed, it's composed by district heating demand and the small district cooling already existing that will be served not only by the existing gas system, so CHP plants and a gas boiler, but also from the heat recovery of third-party power, biogas power plants, from a biomass boiler that would recover the local biomass waste from agriculture, and also storage and the solar thermal system to reduce the pollutant emission, because we have also to take care of the air impact that this plant can have, because the region, the Emilia-Romagna region, it's quite plain and it's suffering sometimes from air quality issues. The last case that I'm going to present to you, it's quite a different one. It's not about district heating plants, but it's about the potential analysis of industrial waste heat recovery along a district heating line. So it's already an example of a replication activity that we have in the framework of the project in another region, and it's in the city of Milano, that is the second most populated city in Italy. It has 1.3 billion inhabitants and has a large district heating system, and the utility running the district heating system in the city also runs another plant 25 kilometers away. That is a very big CHP plant that is actually wasting more than 80% of the heat, of the waste heat that it is producing. So the utility is willing to connect this CHP plant to the city of Milano, but since the connection is quite long, it could cross lots of different towns. The region that is involved, of course, in the process of planning of this district heating line asked us to support them in seeing if along the path this connection could recover some other waste heat. So what we have done was the mapping of the waste heat potential recovery on the connection. So you may see here from the right the CHP plant, and on the other side the city of Milano. So we selected an area in which the district heating connection could be potentially, and we mapped all the industries, and thanks as the same methodologies that were used in the RES-HC spread project. We mapped all the consumption and we tried to estimate all the potential heat recovery. So here you may see for every industries here that are called with letters. You see just some examples. We estimated also the potential recoverable heat. So not only the waste heats, but also the technical fraction recoverable in the district heating line. So taking into account technological issues, temperatures, and so we tried to estimate the potential heat recovery that this district heating line could have, depending on the path that it could have from the plant to the city. So as you may see, the numbers are quite interesting, even if with regards to the needs of the city and what the current district heating system is serving, it's about 1 terawatt-hour, is not much. So the region is actually thinking if it would be interesting to recover them in this district heating line, or more maybe initiate new local initiatives. So that was the results of the synergy between these two examples. Just to conclude, I would say that the mapping results will be available on the web in the next months, and that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Alice. And again, I remind you that you can submit questions through your control panel of the webinar. So thanks to the people who already submitted some questions, so I'm trying to take note of all of them to answer them later. So I will move now to the third speaker. First speaker is Simon White. He is working in the Greater London Authority, which he joined in 2010. He's currently a Principal Policy and Program Officer working on energy and climate change mitigation. And his main areas of work are currently in the centralized energy and the district heating. And he also represents the Greater London authorities in the European project called Celsius. And I must say that we thank the Celsius project for a very good cooperation with Smart Reflex also. And so the Simon presentation is also part of this cooperation between the two projects. And he will focus his presentation mainly on the waste heat recovery and how this, let's call it secondary heat source, can really help the district heating networks. So Simon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the secondary heat study that we sort of undertook here in London. We're going to talk a little bit about the work that we're doing around heat networks, and also a little bit about the Celsius project that we're involved with. As we mentioned, I work in the environment team at the Greater London Authority for the Mayor of London. I work specifically on energy policy. And just a little bit about the targets in our policy framework we have in London. We have a new mayor, Steve Khan, that sort of came into and became mayor in May this year, 2016, last year. And we set a new target for London to become zero carbon by 2050, which is sort of very exciting for us. It sort of gives us another level of ambition beyond where we were before. Previously, we had a target of an 80% reduction by 2050. So we're now aiming to be zero carbon by 2050. There are regional authority, regional government, and like there are 33 local authorities within London that we have relationships with. They deliver activities on a day-to-day basis. We're a regional organisation that has set strategic policy for London. We have a range of mayoral strategies. Probably the most important one is the London Plan. That's a spatial strategy that sets out how we expect or see London wanting to evolve and grow and develop from a planning perspective, from a growth perspective. And then a range of other strategies, including a transport strategy, an economic development strategy, and also an environment strategy. We previously had individual environmental strategies like the climate change mitigation energy strategy, an adaptation strategy, a waste strategy, and now we're combining those to create a new strategy, which is an environment one. We will still address climate change and mitigation and energy issues, obviously, in that, and from that flows a range of support programs that we will sort of develop to be able to deliver those programs and to meet those targets. Just a little bit on heat itself. Basically, sort of about 47% of London's energy demand is in the form of heat. So you can sort of see from that that's a really significant portion of our energy demand, and something that, if we can address the carbon intensity of that heat, then we can make a real contribution towards the decarbonisation of our city and ultimately it becoming zero carbon. And on top of that, about 30% of London's CO2 emissions are related to heat. So you can sort of see it's really important for us to be able to address this. And we sort of think that actually addressing heat is something that's really important for cities, and sort of cities are very well placed, sort of we believe, to be able to do that, with heat being a local energy source and sort of something that you're able to address at a local level. To do that, we sort of believe that we've sort of obviously got to reduce demand in our buildings, but we've also got to decarbonise the intensity of the heat supply to them, and do that in combination to create the most cost-effective and cost-optimum solution. And district heating and cooling networks will certainly contribute significantly to that approach. So we've got sort of, we've done a lot of spatial mapping and things like that to understand where within this London actually district heat networks are the most carbon and cost-effective way of supplying heat. We don't expect heat networks to cover the whole of London, but we have priority areas where we expect to build them out because they're the most cost-effective, as I said, and carbon-effective way of supplying heat. But we have parts of outer London where we don't have the same level of heat demand, where there will be alternative sources of heat supply. And just very quickly, just a recap on some of the programs that sort of we've undertaken historically to sort of get to where we are. We started out by developing a heat map that basically sort of looked at heat demand right across London, and that's the picture on the right you can see there. And obviously the redder the colour, the higher the heat intensity, the heat density. And that also sort of looked at heat sources. Historically, we didn't really think so much about sort of secondary heat or sort of waste heat sources. So that's predominantly sort of generation and heat sources. But as you'll hear as we go through the presentation, sort of we've updated that information with the outcomes from our secondary heat study. Out of that heat map, we also developed energy master plans. I mentioned we have 33 London boroughs. We sort of work with those London boroughs to develop their energy master plans. So that looks at a local authority level, how they might, how energy systems will develop within that borough, where the opportunities for district heating are, what the network routes might be, and also what planning policy they might want to integrate into their planning documents to ensure that they stand the best opportunity of realising the opportunities that heat networks offer for them. And we had a decentralised energy project delivery unit that provided technical, financial and commercial support to develop projects and take them to market. So we had investable projects that we could get funded to deliver. We had a London Green Fund using public sector money and European Regional Development Fund to provide investment to environmental infrastructure to support the development of energy efficiency, of waste infrastructure and also district heating. License Light, where we're looking at becoming a junior electricity supplier. That sort of will enable us to provide greater levels of income streams for electricity generation within London and encourage the development of embedded generation and its contribution towards grid balancing with the electricity system. And we're just in the process of developing out a successor to our decentralized energy delivery project unit, which is going to be starting up this year, and that's basically doing something very similar, technical, financial, commercial support to develop that project. And I mentioned we were part of the Celsius project, which is a really important project for us. And it was actually the instigator behind the work we've done around secondary heat and waste heat sources. It was a project that started in April 2013, running through to December, the end of this year, December 17. Sort of the main aim is to sort of help accelerate the rollout of district heating and cooling systems across the EU. And it's very much got a focus on waste heat, and that was what sort of got us thinking about what the opportunities were in London. We're looking to address technical, political, economic and social barriers. We're also looking to play a role in sort of illustrating how district heating networks and district energy can actually play a role within a wider integrated energy system and actually sort of help us get towards a zero carbon energy system, the role it can play in a city. The Celsius project is delivering innovative demonstration projects in 5 partner cities, all utilising sort of different types of waste heat. In London, we're utilising waste heat from the tube. In Cologne, one of our partners there, utilising waste heat from sewage systems. So we've got that aspect. We've also got offering practical support and engagement with light cities across the EU to sort of help them to develop opportunities for district heating. As I mentioned, we have 20 partners and 5 cities, Gothenburg, which is the lead partner, Cologne, Genoa, Rotterdam, and then London, and also Islington Council. Islington Council, the local authority within London, who are actually delivering the demonstrator. And I mentioned we provide support. This is just very quickly gives you an indication of sort of what we provide. We sort of information around our demonstrators. We have a wiki style toolbox, which is where we put all the information we generate through the project and historical information we have around district heating to try and address some of the barriers and support cities. So it's like an encyclopedia for delivering heat networks. We have an expert group from our project partnership that sort of provides support into our Celsius cities on specific issues. We also try to run thematic workshops and webinars to be able to address the challenges around district heating and cooling. Okay, so that sort of gives you the context about sort of why we were looking to think about waste heat and the role that that can actually sort of play. Because in London, whilst we want to develop out heat networks, we've done a lot of studies to show that they will contribute significantly to the decarbonisation of our heat. We don't have a lot of high-grade industrial waste heat, which is quite often how heat networks are developed out in other cities. But we didn't have that. But what we do have is a significant amount of sort of waste heat from a range of operations that happen across London. I mentioned this study was published in 2013, and the link to this study is there. So just quickly, what is secondary heat, just so that people know what we're talking about? It's like sort of so it's a combination of waste heat and environmental heat. Waste heat is sort of anything emitted from as a byproduct from human activity, really, sort of from industrial, commercial activities, other operational activities happening within the city, from sewage treatment works, from tube networks, things like that. And then there's environmental heat, and that's the naturally occurring heat within the environment. So that's air source, ground source, or water source heat that we're able to sort of extract. Just a few other things that will sort of give you an idea of sort of the nature of secondary heat. It's obviously sort of a variable temperature, and it's sort of generally low-grade waste heat, so it's sort of often sort of under 50 degrees. Variable availability as well, sort of seasonal, and also sort of across the daily cycle as well, so it sort of might be generated more waste heat at certain times of day when activities are happening. And because it's low-grade waste heat, sort of we require a heat pump to be able to utilise it within heat networks. And as you sort of mentioned, the higher the temperature of the heat, then the better the performance of the heat pump. So that's an important aspect, and obviously the better performance from a carbon perspective. We've looked at sort of how we could utilize that heat and sort of generally integrate it into heat networks. We did need heat networks to reduce their operating or flow temperatures down to around 70 degrees to optimize that. And then increasing, obviously, sort of what this does is increasing value, sort of as the grid decarbonizes, the electricity used to power the heat plants is of lower carbon, and obviously sort of we sort of reduce our carbon intensity. Why use it? Because it's sort of in contribution with renewable energy, sort of increasingly replace fossil fuels right through to 2050. Long-term viability of heat networks, and sort of that provides new heat sources for heat networks to utilize. And that's a really sort of important aspect for us, so that we've got heat networks taking different heat sources, reduces primary energy demand and sort of CO2 emissions, because we're not driving activity any long or generation activity. It increases our energy security and sort of self-sufficiency within the city. So we're utilizing the energy that's available within the city more effectively, so that we don't have to make such a large demand on primary energy sources upstream, and contribute significantly to improved air quality and reduced emissions. The objectives of the report to try and quantify the availability, the cost of that energy, and sort of how we might be able to use it. And we wanted to understand the issues around integration with heat networks and buildings, how we could actually integrate that into a heat network and use it. We wanted to inform both city-level policy but also national-level policy to gain support for waste heat and the role it could play in decarbonising systems. Then also to sort of start identifying opportunities for integrating waste heat into district heating projects in London. And this just gives you an indication of the types of heat that we have and the sources and the size of that heat. The dark green is the secondary heat available itself in the study, and then the electricity input required to elevate that to a 70 degree temperature is the light green. So you can sort of see we've got a range of sources, the environmental sources at the left of the screen. We've also got sort of waste heat sources such as power stations, industrial activity, and also water treatment work, sewage, mining. We then, obviously, we saw a spatial representation of that, how much heat we have across each of those sort of different sources and where it is across in London. Well, the important thing for us there was to sort of see how that overlapped with the spatially with the heat demand in London, and actually it sort of mirrors heat demand quite closely. So that's sort of obviously a positive for us there, because obviously the further we need to transport our heat, the more costly it is. So, you can see there, and you can see from the blue where we don't have much heat, and right through to the red where there's significant amounts of heat available. And so I've sort of shown you some of the types of heat that we sort of identified within London, the spatial spread of that heat, and then just here's a few examples around sort of how we think we might be able to recover that heat and integrate it into a heat network. So, for example, in the tube or the metro tunnel, I mentioned Islington Council are sort of looking at integrating waste heat from the tube into their heat network. And basically sort of what we do there, there's a ventilation shaft where all the warm heat is expelled from the tube out into the atmosphere. And what we're doing there is putting a heat exchanger into that ventilation shaft to be able to take the heat out of that and integrate, then use a heat pump to elevate that temperature from the temperatures it is when we're able to take it out, and put that into the heat network. And as an example, the tube, waste heat from the tube is somewhere between about 20 and 28 degrees depending on the season, and so that obviously sort of, and we'll need to elevate that up to, as I mentioned, sort of about 70 degrees is where we're looking to elevate it, so we're able to put that into heat network in Islington. And just as another example, electricity substations, transformers, and those transformers, as they generate, actually as they're working, they generate significant amounts of heat. They need to be cooled, and what we're looking at there, how we might be able to capture the waste heat from there and use that as well. And so we're sort of looking at how you can modify transformers to be able to and make it as easy as possible to be able to capture the heat and integrate it into a heat network. And from all these examples, one of the things we've certainly learned is how easy is it to be able to access that waste heat and integrate it into a network. And just a couple of things around performance. They sort of mentioned sort of as obviously sort of the two things that sort of will influence the performance of heat pumps. One is the temperature of the waste heat. So obviously the warmer the waste heat, the better the coefficient of performance to get it up to our sort of 70-degree target, and also then the operating temperature of our heat networks. You can see from the lines, the blue is an heat network operating at 40 degrees with a flow temperature, much higher coefficients of performance, and the green is one operating at 85, the pink at 70, and the yellow at 55. So you can see it's really important for us to be able to identify heat sources, the temperatures they are, and then if we can lower the temperature of our heat network, then that makes it far more carbon and cost effective to integrate those into the heat network. So okay, just to sort of summarize some of the key findings that we sort of found from this study. Low-grade waste heat, sort of mostly it is their secondary heat sources, their low-grade waste heat. They need upgrading to be able to put into a heat network using heat pumps. Generally speaking, sort of we're quite well matched spatially between availability of waste heat locations and our heat demand. So hopefully they will overlap quite well with our priority areas for heat networks. Benefits are optimized when you can sort of lower the operating temperatures of your heat networks. Traditionally we had 90-degree heat networks. We're looking to reduce that down to 70. Obviously if we can drop that a little bit further, then we don't need to increase the temperature of heat networks of the waste heat to put them into there. And also just sort of something when we're thinking about supplying buildings and the relevance of lowering temperatures and the impact that might have on thermal comfort. What we sort of found was in the UK we have energy performance certificates, and if you were to elevate a building from a level E grading to a level D rating, then that actually allow us to be able to provide 96% of the heat demand, actually if it was to be supplied for a heat network operating at 55 degrees. I think that was somewhere from, without that improvement in installation on the building, then we'll probably only be able to meet about 70 to 75% probably of the annual heat demand. So it's important to think about not only the temperature of your heat networks, but the thermal performance of the buildings you're supplying. And the final bits of findings, we sort of London's 2010 heat demand overall was 66 terawatt hours per year, and from the study we've done, secondary heat sources could provide up to 71 terawatt hours of heat. That's made up of 50 from the heat sources themselves, and then another 21 from electricity required by the heat pump, and that's to sort of supply a heat network operating at 70 degrees. We also sort of looked at how competitive that was with other sources, and we used conventional gas boiler heating as the counterfactual in this case, because that's the main one for the UK, and we sort of looked at about 12 terawatt hours of secondary heat can be considered as cost effective. That's mainly from our industrial waste heat, because we don't need to elevate the temperature there, and that's about 18% of London's heat demand, already cost effective. So that's really encouraging for us to think about, okay, then how do we get our networks in place to be able to use that. And then 56 terawatt hours of secondary heat considered as carbon effective. So that's the amount of carbon associated with that heat and the elevation of that heat to 70 degrees. And that was equivalent to 82% of London's heat demand. So we can see that we've already got a significant amount of London's heat demand could be met in a carbon efficient way from secondary heat sources. And actually sort of nearly 20%, so 18% for cost effective from secondary heat already. So hopefully we're able to sort of start on this process, and as technology improves, hopefully we'll be able to source increasing amounts of waste heat. And that's a very important element for us, because we see district heating playing a very significant role in decarbonising our heat supply. And obviously we need to transition from high and medium carbon heat sources to low and zero carbon heat sources. And just to say that that information is all being integrated into London's sort of spatial heat map. So all the information around these heat sources integrated into that. So we can use that to inform our district heating master plans and things like that. And that's everything from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Let me thank again all the speakers. So we can now open the Q&A session. I would like to start maybe from Louise, who was the first speaker. So there was a question about the shares of renewables which are used in district heating in central Denmark region. Can you give us an outlook if you use geothermal, waste, biogas, solar, or what else?
So the question is what the share is of the district heating of what the share of renewables is in the district heating in central Denmark region.
Yes, exactly, and which kind of renewables you use?
I think it's about 50% renewables today, and it's almost all of it based on biomass boilers, and a little part of it solar energy as well.
Okay, and just one additional question about the let's say the typical district heating system was about the use of seasonal thermal energy storage. So do you have examples of these in central Denmark? I know that in Denmark in general you use seasonal heat storages.
Yes, we have a few examples in central Denmark region. We have a few ATES storage plants or sites where you use the groundwater to storage heat. And then we have some another one which is a borehole storage also, but we have very few seasonal storage in the region.
Okay, and just to complement your answer, because thanks especially to other European project or international research tasks, there are really many detailed information available on these seasonal thermal energy storages, and so I included this answer to all, and I showed you two web addresses where you can find a lot of information about this kind of storages. Okay, thanks Luis so far. So maybe I will ask one question to Alice. So the question is like that. So in the extension of the current district heating network and production, are there any considerations about flexible electrical power production combined with heat storages to meet the increasing fluctuations of renewable energies like wind or solar power? So something which is, we know that it's already happening in Denmark, but is it the case also in Italy?
I would say, so we do not have much wind power. It's more photovoltaic. So the question is about integration of electricity, electric heat to compensate the flexibility of the network, right?
Yes, for instance.
Okay.
The connection between district heating and electricity market also.
Yes, so I would, no, we have not, so no electrical system or electrical heating system were foreseen right now. It could be also, of course, an option. It's used a lot in Denmark, I know, where there is in particular for wind power, they actually use some kind of electric system to compensate this, to produce heat, to compensate this fluctuation, and in particularly combined with the storages, seasonal storages. I would say that we have not this case in Italy, but we have, of course, much integration since many district heating systems are fed actually by cogenerative plants. We have, of course, an influence between the electricity market and district heating. So in particular, when in summer, when there is lots of photovoltaic production, CHP plants in some cases are not running for all the season. So having just gas boilers as a backup means that this kind of system, these systems use just fossil fuel. So it's in particular for the case we have analyzed the importance of integrating renewables to use them instead of fossil fuel backup system when the CHP are not running. It's of course interesting.
Okay, yes, I also have the impression that in Italy we're a bit behind the shadow, let's say, from the point of view of this integration between the heat distribution and the electricity market. Okay, thanks. Then I will ask a question to Simon, and it's about the investments in secondary heat production. So the question is, do they make economic sense, and what is the bottom line, and what are the parameters influencing, let's say, the economic viability of these investments in the secondary heat?
Okay, thank you. The answer is yes, they do in certain situations, and what we wanted to do from the study was to identify where our secondary heat sources were, how close they were to potential priority heat network areas, and then look at how they might be able to sort of provide heat into heat networks. And so what we do when we're doing our feasibility study and business case for the heat network, we will look at those secondary heat sources alongside all other heat sources as well. And so we wouldn't really implement a secondary heat source at this stage unless it was commercially viable. So what we anticipate that it might be, secondary heat sources are increasingly used as new heat sources over the course of time. So as we go towards 2050, we increasingly decarbonize our heat. We have a requirement to increasingly decarbonize our sort of heat supply. Then we'll start bringing on those sort of secondary heat sources increasingly. But that said, wherever we're able to bring a secondary heat source into play now and integrate that into a new heat network or an existing heat network, we would do that. But just to say, we will apply the same rigorous economic parameters as we would with any other heat source. And so I think some of the key things are, how easy is the waste heat to access? So is it easy to be able to sort of put it through, say for example, a heat exchanger, be able to get it to your heat pump, elevate it and into your heat network? How close is it to an existing heat network? Obviously that's an important aspect as well. So those would be sort of a couple of the key aspects. And then, as I mentioned, what is the temperature of that waste heat? Obviously the higher the temperature, the less energy you need to put through your spend on elevating the temperature to be able to get it to 70 degrees to put into your heat network. So a number of aspects that would get in, but as I said, we treat it in the same way as we would any other heat source.
Okay, thank you very much. I go back to Luis. Can you describe a bit more in detail the coordinating function, let's say the coordinating role of the region concerning the individual municipal heating plants for the municipalities? For instance, are you checking if the plants are in line with national energy targets, or whether all communities do not make more use of biomass than the potential is? Or do you have any other kind of control role?
Thank you. No, we do not have any control role, and so we do not control what they do and what they invest in. We try more to work on this volunteer basis by building up knowledge and common sense, you can say, and then we engage the politicians, both the regional and the local, from the municipalities, and also the leaders from the energy supply companies. We try to collaborate with, but we do not control. It's not our role, you can say, and if we do control, we still cannot force them to do anything. So it's very much on the volunteer basis we work.
Okay, thanks. Alice, there is a question regarding your technical potential calculation for waste heat in the city of Milano. So they would like to know more in detail which kind of methodology did you use for this calculation?
Yeah, so it was not an easy task. There are a lot of, we have done lots of literature review about estimation of waste heat from the industrial energy consumption, and then from the waste heat to the technically recoverable. So there will be, of course, more detailed in the presentation that there is on the Smart Reflex project, but I would say that we have based our analysis on the methodologies that 2 previous European projects have done, so Eco Heat Cool and Heat Roadmap Europe. So we used, let's say, it's based on the fraction of the consumption of energy, and we have integrated it with some analysis. We have found about a review of existing case studies in existing district heating line, because I would say that the main technical aspect we have considered is temperature. So it's quite, it's a bit different from the one that Simon has shown. So about low temperature sources, we have just considered high temperature sources, so to be directly integrated in district heating networks. So we have found some real cases about this kind of integration. So we saw what was the fraction of energy that could be recovered, and we used the same, let's say, fraction coefficient also for our cases, depending on the type of industries we have found.
Okay, thanks, Alice. I go back to Simon. There is a question about this flow temperature you're aiming at, so this very low flow temperature of 55 degrees. Would this be a problem in deliver domestic hot water? Isn't it too low for providing domestic hot water?
Thank you. I mean, yes and no, it isn't too low, but there are clearly things we need to consider. So sort of the issues with Legionella, and obviously sort of being able to provide a temperature that it is warm enough for people. And so sort of that was 55 is the low end of the flow temperatures that we would be looking to deliver. We would expect probably the majority of our networks initially to be about 70 degrees, between 65 and 70 degrees. But as we look maybe sort of in the future to reduce the operating temperatures, yes, we will need to ensure that we're able to provide domestic hot water at an appropriate temperature. One, to ensure that we address the Legionella, and also sort of that it's warm enough for users and things. So, I mean, for example, it might be instantaneous HIUs. Maybe if you were to deliver it at even lower than 55, you could then potentially sort of elevate it on site using a sort of a small electrical at source and things. So there are a number of sort of different options that we might be able to use if we thought a flow temperature significantly lower than there would actually sort of provide that sort of cost-effective provision. But as I mentioned, sort of we're probably anticipating the initial temperatures to be around sort of between about 65 and 70. But yes, we are aware of some of the challenges around district hot water, and there are solutions, yeah, that we've got for that.
Okay, maybe just one additional question about the cost of the heat production. Do you have an idea of the current average cost of fossil fuel powered heat and renewable energy heat in London, or can you give us a range, let's say, of heat production cost?
Sorry, I wouldn't be able to give you a sort of an indication on that. I mean, I can get back to you on that one, but apologies, but no.
Okay, I go back to Luis. There was a question about, let's say there are two questions which can be combined. So what are the main benefits for the municipalities or for the other actors which convince them to invest in the infrastructure needed, for instance, to use the excess heat available for district heating network, or to convert the existing energy system to a higher share of renewables? So which are the main reasons behind the investments?
Well, I think the main reasons for the energy supply companies who have to invest, of course, is the economy. They do not invest in something that is more expensive than what they have today. But sometimes it's also they choose, how can you say, the easiest. They choose the easy way, the known technology, and I think by collaborating with us, we can also show them some other possibilities and help them to investigate perhaps some other possibilities. For instance, the example with the surplus heat from Apple in Viborg I talked about earlier in my presentation. In the beginning, the energy supply company in Viborg were more interested in investing in biomass boilers. And we have tried to convince them that biomass in the future is not the best solution actually. And in Denmark today, the biomass has no taxes, energy taxes. It's tax-free, but it might not be. It might not continue that way. So, of course, the main reason for the investors is the economy, but also the green issue. I think in both at the political level, but also in the main, you can say, inhabitants level. I think the green issue, the climate changes, is also an issue, but not if it's more expensive. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And just maybe I add something, because there was another question about the role of European financing. Since we talk about several European projects, I must underline that these projects usually do not support the really district heating installations unless they are really very innovative solutions, but usually these projects support activity of dissemination of technical training, of developing guidelines and so on. So as Luis also was underlining, basically all of this district heating infrastructure should be economically viable, so should have a payback and should show an economic profitability. This is, I think, very important. Okay, so I maybe ask a question to everybody. So it was about the use of sewage, so of liquid waste. Have you ever considered this as a potential heat source? Also, there was this consideration that sewage filtered to a 50% water content can be also burned as biomass. Do you have any experience on that, or have you ever considered this as potential heat source?
Well, I can.
Okay, Luis, sorry.
I'm not sure if it's what you're asking about, but in our region we have now a project where the heat from the waste plant is used together with a heat pump and goes into the district heating. So it's not the liquid, you can say, we burn or get, but it's the temperature of the sewage we use to together with heat pumps to increase and use for the district heating.
Okay, so you recover the heat losses, let's say. Okay, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Simon here, just to sort of add to that. I mean, there are opportunities. Certainly, there are opportunities at sort of sewage treatment works for heat recovery. Sort of, as mentioned, one from the sewage sludge when it's sort of being treated, but also during the process as well, it produces heat, and that can be used. I know that also sort of sewage systems, a biogas is produced, and so that can be used as well. And obviously the effluent, the final effluent from sewage works that are discharged, they're quite warm, and so then you can sort of extract sort of heat from there. So there are a number of opportunities to be able to sort of utilize sort of heat sources within a sewage treatment works. And then it's about how you elevate that temperature and integrate it into a heat network. So yes, there certainly are opportunities, along with the sewage system itself as it's float before it actually gets to the sewage treatment works, the opportunity to sort of utilize heat from within the sewage system on its way to the works as well.
Okay. Alicia, do you know of any examples in Italy?
I don't know about existing example of existing plants like this. I surely know about some examples in the America, I think in the United States, and currently in the energy department of our university we are involved in another European project about renewable energies in buildings, and one of the application and one of the case study application is right now this recovery of heat from sewage. So it's one of the hot topics, let's say.
Okay, so Alicia, maybe I ask you one more question that then I will ask also to the other speakers, because we saw that in Denmark there is this obligation for municipalities to do heat planning. Do you know what is the situation in Italy, and do you know if in any other EU country there is such an obligation?
So we should, the European directive about energy efficiency tells now that municipalities should do it, so they should. In Italy this has been implemented in a national law, so they should do, or at least the biggest cities and small towns should cooperate with the nearby villages to have maybe a regional plan. So yes, they should. I would say that they should, but sometimes, or I would say often, in particularly small local authorities maybe do not have enough technical experience to do that. So I think that our project was very useful to help them in that sense, but yes, it should be.
Simon, would you like to add something on the situation in UK about municipal heat planning?
Just to say that there's a lot of activity going on around heat planning in the UK. We have a national heat map that looks at heat density throughout the UK. UK government has also sort of created a funding program called the Heat Network Development Unit, which actually sort of provides financial resources to local authorities to do detailed heat planning at a borough, at a local authority level. So the identification of where heat demand is sufficiently high for them to be able to potentially develop out heat networks, and then to be able to do pre-feasibility and feasibility studies to understand whether or not those networks would be commercially viable, how they'd need to develop those, and also the network routes and the both the heat sources as well as obviously the heat consumers. So sort of quite a lot of work has gone on around sort of heat planning.
Okay, maybe one additional question to you, Simon, about the low entropy sources. Do you think these sources are sufficient also for the constantly increasing cooling demand in the cities, especially of course in hot climates?
That's a really interesting question. And I mean, obviously sort of as you get the lower temperature waste heat, low grade waste heat, the opportunity to elevate that sufficiently to, if you're going to, it depends I suppose on how you're going to sort of deliver your cooling and whether or not you've got separate cooling systems, and in which case then you're separating your low-grade waste heat sources that are going into your heat network from your cooling sources. But if you were to sort of also undertake cooling from, I mean obviously sort of you'd need to get your heat networks to a higher temperature maybe to run absorption chillers if that was how you were proposing undertaking your cooling. So obviously you'd need to get your temperature to a high network, so obviously again the cost effectiveness would be greater with those sources that are of a higher temperature. So it might be that you would maybe sort of look for alternatives like sort of district cooling network where your sort of predominant energy demand is for cooling in sort of warmer climates.
Okay, thank you, Simon. So we are almost at the end of the webinar, so sorry for not tackling all of your questions, but I try to make as many answers as possible, let's say. So I thank again the speakers for joining us in this webinar, and of course all you participants. Again, I remind you about the questionnaire. You can download and send it back to me. It's very easy and short. And thanks again also to ISIS for co-organizing this webinar. And so I hand over to Joanna for closing the webinar.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelist speakers for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. And thank you, Ricardo, for putting this webinar together and doing an excellent job at the moderating of the Q&A. It was a great session and I hope you all enjoyed it also. To contact the panelist speakers for further information, please have a look at their presentations, which are all available for you to download on the ISIS website. The link will be provided in the follow-up email, which you will get. The next ISIS webinar will take place on Wednesday, the 8th of February, and it will focus on online courses in solar engineering. We welcome you all to join us there. Again, more information on our website. If you use social media, we really encourage you to connect with us and to continue the discussion. Stay tuned to renewable energy and all the different services that we provide our members. Last but not least, thank you to our audience for joining us from all over the world at all different time zones. We look forward to welcoming you at another ISIS webinar or event. You may view the webinar recording in a couple of hours on the ISIS website, so please check there, and on our YouTube channel as well. And as mentioned before, members, you guys can just log in and watch all the recordings and download the presentations in the exclusive members area. If you have comments or feedback, please send them to me at the email address public.relations@isis.org. That's all we have time for. I'm going to close the webinar now. Thank you all so very much for joining.